Maybe a good point here is to mention just how much I've enjoyed watching Yasmin Ryan in these last two games. Man, she works really hard. She's a do-everything kind of an attacker. It's obvious that she has been in many different pressure-filled game states before. She didn't seem particularly easily rattled. I think she deserved to stay in that game as long as she did. Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's edition of The Late Sub. I am your host, Claire Watkins. It is Tuesday, December 3rd. We are pretty much immediately post-whistle of the U.S.'s final game of 2024 against the Netherlands that they win 2-1. But boy, is it a tale of, I don't know, not two halves. It's a tale of many 15-minute moments of terror. And so we're going to talk about all of that here, kind of the things that the U.S. has to do better, what they did well, and all of the lessons that hopefully Emma Hayes learned from this game that she can take into 2025. Let's go. Okay, so it is approximately a half hour after the full-time whistle of the United States' final game of the year, their last friendly, Alyssa Naeher's swan song. And this is going to be some analysis, but it's also going to be a little bit of all of us just trying to figure out what happened together, because I'm still a little bit confused. We're going to talk through some stuff that didn't go so well. We're going to talk through some stuff that did go well. So the United States wins this game 2-1. So they are still unbeaten under Emma Hayes. Naeher starts in this game, and she's incredible for them, and she gets the win in her final match for the United States. But it was obviously just a slog for the U.S. The first half, very tough for them. We're going to get into the lineup, talk about not only the personnel issues that I believe the United States had, but also the way they were being used. The Netherlands outpossessed, outshot, shots on target. They won the XG battle. They dominated the United States in every single aspect of this game, other than just putting the ball in the back of the net. The U.S. gets bailed out. There's a lot to discuss here. And like I said, it might be a little bit scattered because it's a little bit in real time, but I feel like that's the best way to do it. I like doing it this way because it all feels very fresh and I don't want to forget things that I want to talk about. So let's start with the lineup, because this is where I think some of the issues for the United States both begin and end. Naeher starts in goal. The back line is on the right. There's Emily Fox, Naomi Girma, Tierna Davidson slots in, and Jenna Neiswanger slots in at left back. The midfield really ends up being more of a 4-2-3-1 than sort of a stacked 4-3-3. You had Sam Coffey and Corbin Albert kind of in the holding midfield area. You had Lindsey Horan more as like that number 10. And then the three kind of forwards, which again, I think you could look at the wingers as sort of box to box, as has ended up, because they didn't really have much of the possession in the first half anyway. You had Rose Lavelle on the left, Yasmin Ryan on the right, and then you had Jaden Shaw kind of trying to play this sort of more of a target 9 in the front of the forward line. So let's dig into this. I was reminded watching this game, and I think that this is part of the Emma Hayes experience. Many of us have praised Emma Hayes for her ability to get the best out of her players, for her ability to galvanize the team and have them playing to the best of their ability. But I think we also have to acknowledge, and I think everyone thought I went a little bit negative on this, but even in her short tenure with this team in 2024, there have been moments where it really seemed like the team was a little bit technically naive. And I think that this is one of those moments in this game. I was reminded a little bit of another game where I felt like the U.S. got overrun in the first half, which was the Olympic gold medal game in Paris this summer. Ended up not mattering because you had Alyssa Naeher there to bail them out. They had this incredible forward line that was able to get the goal that they needed. Some tough, maybe finishing from Brazil. U.S. is the Olympic gold medalist. But now you look at this game and you say, oh, wow, Alyssa Naeher really bailed them out for a lot of this game. And then you had this moment of brilliance at the end in the second half, which we will talk about. But what is happening between the boxes? What is happening in sort of the nitty gritty tactically for the United States? And there were some mistakes made here. And I think you also, again, like I said, I think you can look at both personnel and the way that these players were utilized. I think maybe the first place to start is with the midfield, right? Hayes has been pretty committed to figuring out where Corbin Albert fits in the United States midfield. I think it's fair to say that even just based on performances that have at times have seemed pretty lackluster, or even specifically, they don't look particularly good for against other teams that like to press in the midfield or put a lot of numbers in the midfield. There is a commitment there to figuring out how this works with Corbin Albert. And some of the things that Hayes has landed on is the idea of Corbin Albert as help defense in the holding midfield for a player like Sam Coffey, with Lindsey Horan in front of them. Now, I personally do not think that that is the personnel answer for the United States. I think you look at this game, You look at games throughout this year, games where the other team is not sitting off of the ball and giving the US all of this possession, games against teams that are stepping up and dominating the midfield. And this is like the typical issue that the United States have is if they lose the ball winning in the midfield, they're cooked. It was a tenet of a lot of the Vlatko Andonovski era, which I know a lot of people were excited to put behind the team, but there was a lot of that today. Corbin Albert as a holding midfielder is not the answer for the United States. I feel very strongly about that. I don't necessarily think that that's just because, in my opinion, she's not getting the development she needs to be U.S. Women's National Team quality. I don't think playing for PSG at this moment is where she needs to be in a game of this stature, not just because it's just like conceptually, but from what we saw today, she was off the pace. I thought that the Netherlands completely overwhelmed her. She was the player that lost her mark on the opening Netherlands goal. I just don't see it for Corbin Albert at this moment. There have been rumors that she's looking for a transfer. I think that would be great for her. But as of right now, I don't fully understand the continued commitment to figuring this out in games when it's just not working, in my opinion. However, I also think Hayes, as committed as she is to making Albert work, doesn't put her in a position to be able to work. She does not play to Albert's strengths. She doesn't really play to Horan's strengths either. When you look at a player like Horan and Albert and Coffey, that trio in the midfield, they looked slow today. They didn't look like they looked too easily bypassed. They were not battling for the ball in this first half. And that just allowed wave after wave after wave of pressure from the Netherlands. Horan is also not being set up particularly well to succeed. So Corbin Albert is not a deep lying passing midfielder. She's not a particularly notable ball winner, especially not playing in the French league for PSG, where at this moment, they're not even in the Champions League. So there's going to be a lot of these moments where she gets to play very attacking football for PSG. She gets to make run into the box. She gets to shoot from distance. She's good at that. I think actually the greatest archetype in terms of comparison to another player that we've seen play for the United States is Corbin Albert is way more of a Savannah DeMello than she is a holding midfielder. And yet, Hayes is committed to having her sit back where she just gets bypassed over and over and over again. She's a step off. She's not comfortable back there. She's not a great passer. The possession isn't there. Then she has Horan sitting, in that playmaking role, having to try to, break things up, trying to generate turnovers, trying to stop turnovers from the Netherlands. And Horan at this moment, we talked about this, some of the physical limitations that she has with that knee that keeps swelling up and just the amount of I want to commend her for the amount of time that she's kind of sacrificed in this midfield. But when you get into these hyper physical, very fast games, Horan is not who you want to be the point of your press, right? She's not the one you want coming back for balls when you have players who are struggling under pressure. They're trying to find outlet passes. So many times Horan would come back trying to receive service and she just didn't get there in time. That's a problem. Switch them, and I think a lot of things change. Hell, keep Horan. If you want to keep Horan as your point because you think that she's good crashing into the box, have Rose Lavelle play the holding midfield and have Albert closer to goal. There are ways to make this work in a better way than they were utilized today, despite my personal opinion that I don't think the personnel is right. So I have twofold issues with the midfield. I think that Hayes should probably be making some sweeping general statements about the state of the midfield after this game. But I also just don't think they necessarily got the tactics right if that is the group that you have to put out on the day. I felt very bad for Jaden Shaw, who was replaced at halftime. She's not as target 9. That's not where she plays. I don't understand. Like, this is a young player who I don't know how many touches she got on the ball, but it certainly wasn't very many. It just wasn't working, right? It was not working. The Netherlands, they're battering the U.S. goal. Alyssa Naeher stands super tall. She's not going to be there next year. As much as I'm like giving her flowers for how incredible she was, I'm so interested about the learnings coming out of this game because, yeah, it was a mess. And then they're able to turn things mentality-wise, but I don't know, man. I really struggle with the way this midfield is being utilized. And I always think of it in two ways. I think anyone who kind of follows my coverage knows this. There's always like what I think should be happening, but then there's also just criticism of the coach's own internal logic. So if you are going to put these players out, why not put them in a way that plays to their strengths, which makes me worry that the coaching staff does not maybe agree with what I'm seeing as to what those players' strengths are. And again, a lot of that very reminiscent of the Andonovski years. So need to be highly critical of that first half because it's worth criticizing. However, right, Naeher plays so well. Oh my God, this team is going to miss that player. What a game to step away from the team on, to say, I could give more here, but I think it's time for the team to figure out what happens after I'm gone. They win this game because of Alyssa Naeher. Yes, they get it to work in the second half in the other end, but the saves that she was making, the way that she stayed calm. I also just want to shout out Naomi Girma again. The way Girma was putting her body on the line in this game was pretty incredible, especially in the second half after the U.S. goes up 2-1. Just, I was really amazed. Girma is so calm and collected and she does so much with angles, but I just thought even her last ditch defending in this game was pretty incredible, which made up for, and I'm going to do my final kind of hammering, which is just Jenna Neiswanger really struggled on that left side. Those issues were exacerbated by kind of how ineffective the midfield was. Neiswanger, I think, is in an interesting place, and I'm curious how Hayes handles this, because Neiswanger seemed like a player that was a very viable, if kind of attacking-minded player at left back for the United States. She had been playing for Gotham. She was Rookie of the Year last year. She has this position change. The team wins a championship, all this momentum, really great, right? By the end of this season at Gotham, Neiswanger was not starting. Gotham started Mandy Freeman in their late season and postseason games. Neiswanger, I don't know exactly what was going on there, if maybe she's got an injury we don't know about, or something about fluctuation of form, but she was not starting for Gotham by the end of this season. And in this game, she did kind of look like a player who had lost some of her confidence, maybe in the position, maybe in some of that defending element where she's very good on the attacking side. And the Dutch knew that. And I think that part of what makes the Dutch such an incredible, like a really fun opponent for the United States is I think they're so tactically nimble and they're so good at pouncing on all of the US's weaknesses. So again, all of the things that I'm saying, Hayes is seeing as well. This is going to be really good tape for the US. But I am really curious where this places Jenna Neiswanger, if she needs a new club environment, if she needs a refreshed club environment with the same team, if she needs maybe more training with the United States. If I'm curious kind of where her mentality is right now, because that does not seem like an unsalvageable situation for me. But I am just sort of wondering what the vision is for a player like that. How do you get her back in her top form? Or do you just kind of understand that maybe because this is a recent conversion for a player like that, there are going to be these fluctuations of form, and then you have to decide how that player works into a national team structure. Again, kind of reminiscent sometimes of the Andonovski era, where you try to put players into different places and you say, oh, but they're very good going forward, and then they're just really uncomfortable on the other side of the ball. How do you handle that? Healthy competition for that particular point of the field for the United States, I think, going into 2025. But then they do survive. Alyssa Naeher makes her saves. It was an unmarked header on a corner kick, was the actual goal scored by the Netherlands, which, while not great, was not in the run of play. The Netherlands does not score in the run of play in this game. And then they get kind of a lucky moment at the end of the first half where there's an own goal. Suddenly it's 1-1 and all to play for in the second half. The U.S. kind of muddles through the first 15-20 of the second half, and then they start really making the subs. So the big subs that they make at halftime, which did seem pretty important, was that they moved Emily Sonnet in for Jenna Neiswanger, and they moved Lynn Williams in for Jaden Shaw. Now, I would like to think that the Williams for Shaw moment is like, we need a little bit of bite. We need a little bit of veteran leadership. We need a number 9 that's going to force the issue to get on the ball, where Shaw was struggling to do that. Again, I say, why did you put Jaden Shaw out there to play that particular game with that particular midfield behind her? Why not swap her in? I mean, if it would have been up to me, I would have brought Williams in, taken Horan out, and dropped Shaw back into the playmaking number 10. That didn't happen. Instead, it was a like for like. Shaw doesn't really get a ton of tape out of that game. Sonnet for Neiswanger had to happen. That's pretty obvious. I think just you need a veteran leadership there. You learned what you're going to learn from Neiswanger's first half. Now it's time to try to settle things down and try to go win the game. And then in the 65th minute, Hayes makes the big swath of changes. She brings in Alyssa Thompson, Hal Hirschfeld, and Lily Johannes on to try to kind of bring the brigade, empty the bench, see what you can do. And Yasmin Ryan finds Lynn Williams, and they go up 2-1, and that ends up being the ball game. Maybe a good point here is to mention just how much I've enjoyed watching Yasmin Ryan in these last 2 games. I mentioned in the England game that final piece of the finishing wasn't quite there, and again, not quite there again in this game. But man, she works really hard. She's a do-everything kind of an attacker. It's obvious that she has been in many different pressure-filled game states before. She didn't seem particularly easily rattled, even though, again, maybe that final product, maybe some of the possession elements were not there. So I really enjoyed what I saw from Ryan. I think she deserved to stay in that game as long as she did. And she was the one who was able to get, as you know, the Netherlands were pushing, the game opens up a little bit. The U.S. gets a counter going the other way. Very nicely placed ball from Yasmin Ryan. Very nice, just gunning in shot from Lynn Williams. They go up 2-1. So the U.S. walks away from this with a win. Sure, that feels great. You don't want to end the year on a loss. It's a sting to kind of sit on. You don't want to send Alyssa Naeher out with a loss, right? But what are the larger learnings out of this game despite that performance? And I think I want to kind of just, it makes you want to kind of like shake the table a little bit on some of these concepts that the U.S. has continued to sort of trot out. And that has kind of continued to permeate the program despite the coaching change from last year to this year. I think a big one is I have not seen the midfield, whether it just has to do with pace or their club environments or mentality or experience, that balance still is not quite right. And we say that in so many different ways every single game, right? How many times have you heard me say the defense was great, the attack was great, don't know what's going on with the midfield? And I think this was the game where they almost deserve to have it just come all crashing down so they can build it back up after. Instead, the defense was great, the attack was great, they get the win, right? If you're going to stick with this personnel, which I don't know if I agree with, I think we have to walk away from this concept that that players on teams with high possession stats are necessarily good at possessing the ball in a high octane international game environment. I think specifically the two midfielders who played in this game who play in France, who are on high possession teams, who hold the ball a lot, both of whom are actually they're lovely goal scorers for their teams. They shoot the ball well, they get into dangerous places. But that experience that they have at the club level is not replicable to a game like this one. Is it replicable to a game where you've got a team in a bunker? Yes. Is it replicable to a game like the game against Japan in the Olympics? Yes. And we saw Albert have a good game in that match, right? But in this kind of a game against top European competition, who is going to pack the midfield, that's what the Netherlands do. It's technically naive to walk out with this team and go, oh, well, they're going to possess very well because we see how well they possess for club. It's just not replicable competition, in my opinion. And I don't know if just like an NWSL player is the answer, but they certainly are more used to getting stuck in. I was impressed actually by Sam Coffey in this game, where she was getting bypassed as well. She's not the fastest player on the field, but about at the 30-minute mark, you see her start to get stuck in a little bit. And you see, okay, she's trying to implement some of that mentality ball, that she's trying to get gritty here. She's trying to, the ref let a lot go. It was not a very tight whistle. She's like, okay, at the very least, I am going to try to implement where I am and just not become an easy person to have the ball taken away from me. Or if the ball does get taken away from me, I'm going to do everything I possibly can to get it back. I was impressed by that with Sam Coffey. And I just didn't quite see that with the other two midfielders today. And so I think for as much as Hayes talks about wanting to possess the ball and wanting to kind of change the way that the team plays, I don't think we can look at this one-to-one comparison. And especially, again, if you're going to put them out there and not actually pay to their best mental and physical traits. I should get off my soapbox here. It's like all I'm talking about. But I just would like to see some of those changes next year. I don't know what the answer is. I thought Johannes looked a little bit nervous today. Rightly so. Completely understand. I really do agree with Hayes doing slow progression here with a teenager like that. I do not think Lily Johannes should be starting every single game for the United States for the next 2 years, because that's not crunch time. That's not what's important. What is important is for her to get really comfortable with the program and set up to succeed. I want Hayes to start utilizing Jaden Shaw better. I think things will change also once they get their starting front line back. But what's happening with the midfield, it's either getting fixed or it's not, right? And they did just enough in the Olympics to have it not really matter. And it's also true, I will concede, that they faced some bunkers in the Olympics. You know, maybe they do need to have, for a full 23-player roster, some players who can do different things. But you cannot get so locked in on what you think a player can do that you are not seeing what they are actually doing. And that feels like the disconnect in the midfield. And it's just so easy to fall into that trap as a national team manager, where you see positive qualities in a player in training, you see positive qualities in a player in the way they play for their club teams, and then you get into a game and it doesn't translate. And those are the difficult decisions that you have to make over time. And I would like to think that Hayes will put herself in a position to make that call in January, where they do the futures camp. They're going to have some young players come in. I think we've seen some really incredible young players in the NWSL and at the U.S. Women's National Team youth levels who deserve the chance to intermingle with the senior team. I'm really curious, if maybe Naeher, again, bowing out of her own volition doesn't even generate maybe a little bit more turnover in the team. I'm curious if Crystal Dunn returns to football in 2025. I have no inside information, just she's been away from the game for a number of months, and sort of what that means of how they balance the changes that they want to make and that sink or swim mentality. And so I'm going to do the thing that I always do, which is that I've been very highly critical of the team in this game, but I think that is the point, right? That's why you go to Europe. That's why you get exposed. And there's nothing wrong with getting exposed so long as you learn from it. And that is the next step that Hayes has not yet been asked to do yet. So when she came into this program, she made some tough calls, right? She leaves Alex Morgan off of the Olympic team. She changes some of the leadership structure inside the team. She takes her vantage point from outside to slot some players in to some obvious places where they're best served. Sometimes it gets harder to do that from the inside, though. So you have the big success over the summer. You're trying to maintain, again, you're trying to keep your veterans involved while bringing new players in. You're doing it while winning. Winning is a little bit addicting when it comes to the United States Women's National Team. We've seen it before. And now you have to continue to make tough calls. And making tough calls over and over and over and over again is, I think, the true most difficult thing that you have to come up with doing for the U.S. Women's National Team. We'll see if that happens. But an incredible 2024 for this team. Like I said, you watch Alyssa Naeher in motion, you think, man, we're going to miss that player. They said goodbye to so many legends this year, and it feels good to feel like the player pool is incredibly healthy, just so long as they get the right opportunities. And there's something to be said for bringing the veterans in and having a half where the U.S. looked a little bit passive, and yet they get the job done, that little bit of magic. And I think if there's anything I will remember in 2024, beyond perhaps, Alyssa Naeher having one of her best years in her final year, or Naomi Girma being the best defender in the world, or, Triple Espresso coming in and taking on the mantle of scoring for the U.S. Women's National Team and succeeding, it will be that little bit of magic, that tenacity, that X factor that the United States has. And that is due to the rejuvenation of the program under Emma Hayes. And I think that if there's any major positives as we squabble about the particulars, it is that. It is that they have room to make mistakes and not get completely bulldozed. It is that if a player is struggling, it's maybe because they're new, or it's maybe because they're figuring out where they fit into this system, or you're seeing other players come in off the bench and succeed. That vitality to the program is really important, and it does allow you to overcome the lumps. And so if there was one game to encapsulate all of those things, it was this last one. And it was really nice to get another really interesting matchup out of this trip. It's been an honor to cover the U.S. Women's National Team this year. Yet again, like I keep saying, they do not always need to be good, but they do always need to be interesting. And they gave us one final incredibly interesting match to go on here. So very productive trip. But as we know, lessons are only valuable if you learn them. And we're going to find that out in January. So this has been today's edition of The Late Sub. I am your host, Claire Watkins. Shout out to producer extraordinaire Parker Fenton. Thanks y'all for hanging with us this week for the U.S. schedule. We'll have more on some other sports later in the week. We're going to have a little bit more about probably some U.S. wrap-up stuff. We've got end-of-year stuff. We've got a lot of things to talk about. So thanks everybody for hanging with us for the U.S. Lovely little capper after the end of USL season. We've got so much more for you coming up.